Alrighty, let's jump in here. All right, so we ended off. So we're still talking about the nuns. We ended off talking about this kind of idea. Basically, like, what are the things? So we're talking about the nuns, right? This super fast growing group of people who are more or less, I would say, religiously indifferent, right? They don't seem to care much about religion and religious topics. For the most part, they're kind of right? But their growth rate has been pretty stellar, and we're talking about the factors that sort of both could contribute to a growth in the nuns. And so and what kind of it looked like. So we had our 5 points. Sorry, I'm going to give you a seizure here. Our 5 variables that might lead to people becoming nuns, right? So parents giving religious choice to children, intellectual disagreements, social influences, life transitions, and irreligious socialization. And then on this slide, we have those factors that Thiessen and Wilkins-Laflamme think might actually slow down or eventually stop the growth of the nuns, right? So, religious immigration being the first, right? The vast majority of people in the world outside of the West remain religious, and that's where the sources of immigration are coming from. Only 17% of those born abroad said they had no religion. So as we get more people from abroad, right, they're making up what is it? Canada's population is about a quarter people who are born outside of Canada. By 2030, it's supposed to be like a third. So that may kind of slow the growth of the nuns. Religious nuns emigrating, particularly from the United States, going to more friendly places for nuns, more socially liberal, and those kinds of things. And then fertility, right? The nuns have a very low fertility rate. And the religiously affiliated have a slightly higher one. In Canada, it's still really low. But in the US, it is a little bit higher, right? A little bit closer to that replacement rate. Okay. So we ended off there, and I said I'd talk about this slide today. Okay, so reaffiliation, right? People becoming, going from nun back to a status of reaffiliation doesn't appear to be that common. Some proportion of what Huth calls liminal nuns, right? So nuns that are maybe not hostile to religion, probably those that just kind of were religious and drifted away. They stopped attending and it just kind of drifted back. Maybe there's a life event, that draws them back. Birth of a child, death of a loved one, something that pulls them back into religion. Huth puts the number about 1 in 5 Americans switch kind of back and forth between religious traditions at any given point. So in 2008, 19% of those who said they were raised as nuns in the United States said they were now, sorry, I'm missing a word there, raised as nuns in the United States said they were now attending religious services monthly or more. So about 1 in 5, 20% or more, or around there, sorry. Okay, so those who do reaffiliate follow, I changed this slide a little bit just now because, I wanted to. Those who kind of reaffiliate tend to follow a particular pattern into reaffiliation. Okay, so the first step is, first, they belong, right? So they'll find themselves associating with religious people in a religious congregation or amongst a lot of friends who are religious, so they start belonging to a particular group. At step 2, they behave, right? So they start acting very much like religious people, right? They go in and they start, attending religious services, probably attending, para-religious activities, right? Whether it be, other services, weeknight services, prayer groups, Bible studies, whatever it happens to be, social service, right? Or social justice work, any of these kinds of things, they start to behave like religious people. And at step 3, the big one, they start to believe. Now, this is coming from, from Huth and from Wilkins Laflamme, and thesis. And what I have here is my hashtag for the day, which is Rodney Stark was right. Because this is exactly the pattern that he lays out when he was talking about the Moonies, right? That this is the way that people enter religion, right? It's not through belief first, it's through belonging first, right? Belonging is the key, right? And it's that, I was going to draw a scale, but I can't draw, so I'm not going to bother, right? It's when your belonging in a group outweighs your other social relationships that you move into, step 2 and 3, which is the behavior and the belonging, and the belief, sorry. Belonging is the kind of number one thing. So, belief, belonging, behave, believe. Rodney Stark was right, like he's right about everything. So let's leave it at that. Okay. So religious retention rates by decade. So what are we looking at here? This is basically, there's a couple of things that are really interesting here. And again, right, this is from Ryan Burge. Always want to give him credit because he does data visualization better than anyone I've ever seen, and he does a ton of it. He basically makes a chart like this every single day of the year, except for Christmas. So, I always have lots of material because Ryan is busy at work, or because apparently he has more free time than I do. But he's made a career for himself, starting with this. I know he has books published. It's a great plan. So, hey, if you want a plan for how to use your sociology degree, pick a topic, start doing data visualization, put it on Twitter every single day. You might come out with, a book deal out of it. Okay, so what is this? Basically, this is kind of retention rates by decade for a bunch of different religious groups. So this is, if someone was born, I see your question, I'll get to you in a half sec. If someone was born into this particular religious group, what is the odds that they are going to remain, that, when they answer this survey, they're going to say that they're still affiliated with that same tradition? Yeah, please.
Specifically for Canada?
This is US, right? So this is GSS data in the US from 1972 to 2018. Sadly, we do not ask this question on the Canadian census, so we don't know. Okay, so basically what you can see is like the retention rates per decade, right? So back in the 1970s, evangelicals, about 78% of people who were born evangelical still said they were evangelical. That rate has stayed roughly steady, right, with a little bit of a decline into the 2010s, in the kind of mid-ish 70s, right? It's at about 73 now, but not a big kind of decline. All right, mainline Protestants. These are our friends, the Lutherans. Everyone blames the Lutherans. The Presbyterians, the Anglicans or Episcopalians in the U.S., Kirkland brand Catholics, as I like to call them. Presbyterian, Congregationalists, and a bunch of other Methodists and this sort of thing. Okay, so back in the 1970s, their retention rate was about the same as, evangelicals. But by the 2010s, it had dropped to 58%. So only 58% of those, who are affiliated with the same tradition they were raised in. So they've moved to something else. Okay, Black Protestants, a bigger decline, right? Back in the 1970s, 87% of them were affiliating, and it's been a story of kind of slow decline. Today, it's only about 71. Catholics, even bigger decline, right? They were outperforming evangelical and mainline Protestants in the 1970s, and by the 2010s, right? So the last bit of data we have is 2018. They had dropped to only about 2/3 of those raised Catholic remained Catholic. And then other faiths, pretty steady around 87%, so good retention there. One of the big stories here, though, I think that's really interesting is no religion, right? So if you look back at the 1970s, only about a third, a little bit more than a third of those who said they were raised with no religion remained in no religion when the survey was taken, right? So that means that, about 2/3 of them, a little bit less than 2/3, 63%, were moving to religious traditions, right? So they were becoming religious even if they were raised in no religion. Now that number has now basically flipped, right? We're now in the 2010s, sorry, I scribbled over the number. In the 2010s, 66% of those raised in no religion remain in no religion. So that, number has basically inverted, right? It used to be about a third that remained in no religion. Now only about a third leave no religion and switch into religion. So the retention rate for no religion, if we count it as a religion, right, is climbing, and I would expect that it's going to continue climbing, that more and more people raised with no religion will remain irreligious, right? Because all of the, with all of these other ones kind of going down, except other faith and evangelical, which is essentially flat, there's just less religious pressure around to push people back into a religious affiliation, right? So the nuns' retention rate is going up over time. Okay, and yeah, so basically, again, Ryan, brilliant, love him, follow him on Twitter, subscribe to his Substack, pay him money. This is not a paid ad read, he's just great, and if you're interested in this subject, you can't do better than this stuff. Okay, so if we look at the retention rates, right, this is just a different way of visualizing essentially the same data, and you've now lumped mainline and evangelical Protestants into one line, which decreases the kind of fall off of the line. And basically what we see is our religious traditions, their retention rate is dropping, right, kind of starts high and drops down. Catholics, drops down even more. And no religion has just been going up and up and up, right? So the retention rate of people saying they're still affiliated with the tradition they were raised in, dropping for religious, are two major religious traditions in the U.S., Protestantism and Catholicism. And no religion is getting better at holding on to people, which, the fact that no religion isn't really an organized structure just means more people are staying irreligious that were raised irreligious. Okay. Oh, the chart of doom. Okay. There's a lot of interesting things on this chart. Let's have a look. It can be a little bit hard to read, but let's do our best. So basically, right, on this axis, we have the religious tradition that people were raised in. Yeah, sure, go ahead, before I get into it.
With the final exam, there's been a lot of graphs in the past few lectures. How is that going to be in the exam?
Interesting question. I will get back to you on that. I haven't quite written all the final exam questions, so once I get to it, I will tell you. All right? Does that make sense? Okay. The graphs are just a fun way of showing the data. Hopefully. Okay. Other questions? How are we doing? All right. Jessica says thumbs up, so she has no questions. All right. What was I saying? All right. So no religion, right? So this is the tradition that you were born in, and this is the religious tradition as an adult. Okay. So what's interesting on this chart? So where do people go, right? So those people who switch traditions, right? Where should I start? Let's start with no religion, because it's higher on the chart. Okay, so no religion. We'll stick off unclassified because that's confusing. No religion. Basically what we can say is for those raised with no religion, about 16% of them end up moving into evangelicalism, right? So 16% of those with no religion go to evangelicalism. For evangelicals to no religion, it's a rather small number, only about 13%, right? So, interesting. For no religion, right, only about 5% become mainline Protestant, 1% Black Protestant, 5% Catholic, 1% Jewish, 5% other faith, and then 66% of them remain in that same tradition. For those who are Jewish, basically no data, 0% become mainline Protestant, 82% of them stay Jewish. That's a good retention number. 4 of them move to other faiths, and 13% of them end up as nothing in particular. Now, I will say with Judaism, it has a really strong cultural component, so it's not surprising to see Judaism holding on to people a little bit better than some other traditions, in that you're not just religiously Jewish, you're also culturally Jewish. So a lot of people will identify as Jewish, even if they darken the door of a synagogue not very often. They don't keep kosher and don't do Shabbat or any of those things. Okay. They might do the Seder. A lot of, it's kind of like Christmas, which is Passover. But mostly, there's a lot of non-religious Jews, but they still identify as Jewish because, it's one of those things. Okay, so Catholics, right? About 9% of them go evangelical, 3% of them go mainline, 1% of them go into Black Protestant traditions. About 2/3 end up remaining Catholic. None of them become Jews, apparently. Other faith, and then 17% end up in no religion. So a little bit more than our evangelicals. The main line, right? So Black Protestant, it's a particular tradition, right? And it's interesting. 9% of them go to evangelical, probably non-denominational churches. 2% of them end up in the main line. 71% stay. 2% of them become Catholic. 1% of them become Jewish. That might be like Black Hebrew Israelite. Who knows? The data doesn't tell us. Other faith, and then 13% of them move into that nuns category. So you have a pretty, healthy number going into evangelical from a bunch of different traditions, which is interesting. Mainline Protestants, as the mainline collapses, Protestants move into other Protestant traditions. So 14% of them go into evangelical churches. Just over half. This number is going to go down some more. Stay in the main line. There's no Black Protestants. 5% of them end up at Catholics. None of them end up at Jewish. Other faiths. And a hearty 20% end up in the nuns. And then evangelicals, right? Most of them stay. So almost 3/4 of them stay. 8% of them go into another Protestant tradition. A small amount go Catholic. No Jews. Other faith. And 13%. So, they're basically, outperforming, if you kind of look at it. The only tradition that's sort of outperforming the number who end up in the nuns is basically evangelicals, right? More in percentage-wise, so the numbers-wise might not be the case. A bigger percentage of nuns end up in evangelicalism than evangelicals ending up as nuns. But every other tradition, right, it's basically less, right? And considerably less. So, I don't know, that's an interesting piece of information. Evangelicalism looks kind of healthy-ish in some ways. And then the unclassified, I don't know what the question was on the census, basically better than 1/3 of them end up in evangelicalism. 1/4 of them end up as nuns, and then, other faiths, 23%, which suggests maybe there's just not their religion on the kind of census form that's being used. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, death by chart, right? Okay, so this is again just the kind of the same information visualized a little bit differently. How did non-religious people grow up, right? So in the 1970s, right, you see only 15% of non-religious people grew up non-religious. By the 2000, well, really by the 90s, right, you're into the 30% range. And then, evangelicalism has, about pretty solidly about 12, 13, 14%. Not a big change per decade in terms of contribution to the nuns. The main line used to contribute a lot, 30%. It's roughly halved, only because there ain't no mainline Protestants left, hardly. And then Catholics, right, pretty steadily contribute, 33% of those who end up as nuns. Okay, so why I think that's important in the U.S., especially because Catholics only represent somewhere around between 15 and 20% of the population. So they're definitely over-contributing in terms of their percentage of the population to the nuns. A lot of Catholics are taken off. And it's staying, one of the things about Catholics is there's a sort of global replenishment of American Catholicism, right? Because there's Catholics all over the world. It's the world's largest religion at about 1.3 billion people. So there's a constant kind of source of replenishing Catholics in the U.S., which means that this percentage in terms of contribution to the nuns can remain roughly steady because you're bringing in the U.S., you're mostly talking about, people from Latin America who are overwhelmingly Catholic for the most part, with a few exceptions. meaning there's getting more and more Catholics into the country. However, the percentage of Catholics in the U.S. never grows. It's always been around 20%, probably because, so many people are moving into that nun category, as well as, people leaving Catholicism for, if I go back, Catholicism for evangelicalism, principally. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm killing you with charts, but they're fun to explain. Okay. So, in what religion were you raised? So our blue line is current and our red line is raised. Okay, so what you basically see is that essentially every religion basically has more people or fewer people currently in it consistently, right? So no religion is here except for no religion. But every kind of religious tradition, evangelical, mainline, Black, Protestant, and Catholic, basically has more people who were raised in that tradition, the red line, than people who are currently practicing, which means there's more people essentially that have left those religions than ultimately are currently practicing. And you see the gap for Catholics is absolutely huge, right? Like this is a massive statistical gap, right? So you're talking about, a little bit less than 30% practicing versus over 40% who are essentially, they were raised in it but aren't practicing it anymore. So Catholics, have the way Ryan put this, and I loved it because I heard him, this was in a Substack post. He said for evangelicals, right, the check engine light for them as a religious group came on about here, right, where those two lines crossed. Prior to, where are we talking, around 2000, a little bit before 2000, there were always more people who were currently practicing evangelicalism than were raised evangelical, which means they were cannibalizing people from other religious traditions. So to essentially kind of grow, right? But that crosses, about 1990, I would say. About 1990. And this data you can go back to about 1900 with this data, which is really interesting because, the oldest people born that we have records of in that 1972 census, or GSS, were born kind of around the turn of the 20th century, right? So this is a really long historical timeline. So basically, what Ryan says is the check engine light for the evangelical car came on about 1990. What he says I love what he says about Catholics. The car has been on fire since essentially, really about 1950 for sure, when that gap became really big. But there's always been more people who are kind of raised Catholic than currently called themselves Catholic, going right back, essentially to the beginning of the 20th century. So this is on fire. The check engine light on this thing turned on. It can probably keep going for a while. The main line, there are fewer and fewer people who are raised in the tradition and fewer and fewer people who have left, right? Or currently, there's less current and less who have left because it's just becoming smaller and smaller. Black Protestant, it's roughly steady. But then the nuns, right? Our friends, the nuns. There are many, many more people who were currently nuns than were raised as nuns, right? So they're taking people from other traditions in massive fashion. So this growth of the nuns remains quite the story. Okay. So, I'll come back to this. This drives me completely bonkers. This is like the section of the course where I just want to stand against the wall and hit my head repeatedly against it because none of the data makes any sense. And I don't know if I have it. Oh, do I have the book with me? I don't know if I brought it today. I might have left it at home. I didn't bring it, but I just got this newest State of Youth and Religion 2023 book from Springtide Institute, which is one of my favorite kind of places in the US because they do research that I'm super interested in. And it's like something like 13% of atheists consider themselves, or it's 11% of atheists consider themselves somewhat religious, which makes me want to hit my head against the wall because I don't understand what's happening. And this is like numbers that came out. There's from a few months ago. absolutely drives me completely bonky. I don't know what to make of it. Anyway, hopefully we'll get to that data a little bit later in the course. I know we don't have a ton of time. Yeah, Jessica.
Would you argue maybe because people don't really know what the definition of things are? Like, oh, I'm an atheist, but I still believe in this and this. Like,
Oh, that's 100% what it is. But I just want to put people in like these bright, shiny, well-defined boxes. And when people resist my bright, shiny, well-defined boxes, it makes me angry because I'm like, but you're an atheist, right? So you don't believe in it. So you're not religious. Well, that's not working for me. It makes me crazy. And this is the problem, right? If we expect people to be perfectly intellectually consistent, you're going to be disappointed because that almost never is the case. People are not this good at kind of defining themselves. But it still makes me crazy because I'm like, all right. All right. So yeah, 64%. And this, okay, so this is, if we go back to, Phil Jenkins's kind of objection to some of the Pew data, right? 64% of U.S. nuns believe in God or a universal spirit, right? So again, if you want to talk Rodney Stark's objections, and why he would argue, look, this isn't secularization. You can't talk about secularization when 64% of those who say they're not religious believe in God or a universal spirit. That is a religious belief, right? 34% of U.S. nuns do not believe in God, so about a third of them don't believe in God or a universal spirit, but only 13% are atheists. So what are the other 17% identifying as? Some of them are agnostic, some of them are blah, blah, blah. I don't know, right? Consistency, not the strong suit. Half of them believe in life after death, with heaven being a little bit more, and so not all of them are conceiving of it in sort of Judeo-Christian or really Christian notions of heaven and hell, right? Only 41% of them say they believe in heaven in the kind of Christian sense, and 29% of them believe in hell. The others, seem to believe in something of an afterlife that's a little bit ill-defined. And it's always interesting, right, to actually like read some of the comments people make. Or, like when I've been to, unfortunately, I'm at the age where some of my friends have died, friends' funerals who would have been nuns or atheists, and realizing that people who are also not religious are talking about, oh, they're in a better place. And I'm like, okay, I would like to question you. What place is that exactly? But I don't because I'm not a jerk and it's their loved one who died. So whatever they want to say is fine with me. But it's like they're in a better place. I remember my one friend who passed away. Apparently everyone remembered him as 10 years old because the only thing they remembered is that he loved Ninja Turtles as a kid, which is, for a 32-year-old man, it's a little weird. It's like apparently you did nothing else with your life in the rest of your life other past when you were 10 because no one remembers anything. And I remember his sister being like, he's in that big turtle blimp in the sky. And I was like, that is the weirdest notion of heaven I've ever heard. But okay, I was like, all right, what a strange thing to say. That one will stick with me and haunt me to my grave, right? But again, there's not a terrible consistency in people's beliefs, right? Like, what do they mean by universal spirit or God? This is a really big question, like, because it's probably not God in the Christian sense. It's probably just sort of a vague notion of like some kind of creator that made the universe. And I was going to say a bad word. And then after that, got out of there and maybe shows up when you have need or something. Maybe? I don't know. Okay. All right. So interestingly enough, 74% of U.S. nuns believe the Bible was written by men rather than having a divine origin, right? So these are, I think constructivists in terms of religious texts. They don't think that there's a divine basis behind the Bible, or in this case, because we're talking about Americans, they're mostly Christian, but I suspect they would say the same thing about the Quran, that has a human author rather than having divine origins, right? And this I think is sort of a weird question in the sense that it's like an outgrowth of really fundamentalist Protestantism, where apparently they think that God came down, grabbed the pen, and wrote the Bible, which has never been what Jews believe, certainly. Yeah, Jessica.
Would the data shift a lot if we brought agnostics might be something, but it's like I don't want to jinx myself and say that there isn't.
Agnostics are all like, I'll have to take a snapshot of the graph that's out of this new youth and religion data. Agnostics are all over the board as well. It's like, in terms of like spiritual, like, oh, it's like 30% of them say they're religious, which is like, I don't understand. And then like 2/3 of them or better say that they're spiritual. And I'm like, okay. The atheists make me more crazy because when they say they're spiritual, I always think that atheism is sort of like Richard Dawkins' hard materialism, right? You're a bag of meat flying through the universe and there is no spirit. Sorry, that's an illustrative kind of way of putting it. Or, you know, what in Star Trek terms, you're an ugly bag of mostly water floating through the universe and there is no spirit. So when someone is like, I'm an atheist, but I'm spiritual, I'm like, but how? I don't understand. If you're being intellectually consistent, you shouldn't think there is a spirit. So how could you be spiritual? What do you mean by that? I want to hit my head against the wall. Please stop. But again, people might not be fully intellectually consistent, right? By atheist, they might mean I don't believe in Christianity, but I might have some like weird notions like, oh, I should show you this picture. I took it because I took it specifically for this class. I was at Costco. And there's literally a rack of books, and it's like tarot cards and Reiki crystals. And they're in, I don't know if you remember as a kid, they had like those books you opened and there was like My Little Ponies inside and a play mat. Well, this is that for like Gen Z spirituality. It's like a book, you open it and there's like a bunch of crystals inside. I have to show you this picture. I'll bring it in. I have it on my phone, but I'll bring it in. I'll put it in a slide next time. Because I was like, oh, this is like the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I was going to talk about it when we talk about Faith Unbundled. But will we get to Faith Unbundled if I don't shut up about this point? Probably never, which is too bad because that's a really interesting concept. It was just like, yeah, I mean, this is for like the Gen Z no religion crowd. It's like, here's your tarot cards that you now buy at Costco. Costco. Oh, I don't understand. And like crystals, like there's like quartz crystals. I wanted to buy them, but I think it's dumb. So I'm just like, why? It's like a market, and Costco, it's apparently like, it's not just like niche Amazon stuff anymore. Now it's apparently gone to Costco. So it's like a mass market Gen Z crystals and tarot card spirituality, and I don't understand. Please stop my rant,
I
please.
think it's ironic that it's in like the Christmas gift section as well. Because like, let's just mix it all together. It's fine.
Jingle bells, or away in a manger, no crib for a bed. The three wise men brought tarot cards and Reiki crystals. Oh yeah, it's what a culture we live in, right? It's such an interesting place, but it's bizarre, like that. Like the big box stores have now delved into like spirituality. It's just odd and wonderful, and also what? Okay. Oh, so beliefs in Canada. One of the problems with Canada is our data sucks, on religion especially. We have sucky data. I don't like it. We don't do enough research on it, and there's not enough funding and not enough interest to do really good religion research, which is why Joel Thiessen, who's like the best sociologist of religion in Canada, is at Ambrose University in Calgary, which has like 600 students. And it's like a little evangelical, nothing wrong with it, but it's very small. Like, for how prominent he is, he should be at a much more prestigious university. Yeah, I mean, kind of the data that Joel and Sarah cite, or Thiessen and Wilkins Laflamme cite, comes from this Angus Reid poll of 657 religious nuns, which is, they admit, is a non-representative sample. So Canada, the data is a little bit different, right? 72% of them say they do not believe in God or a universal spirit, which is more consistent. 68% do not believe in life after death, which still means about a third of nuns do believe in life after death. Reginald Bibby, he's retired now. He was at University of Lethbridge for a really long time, and he was like the go-to guy on SOS of religion in Canada. I never really liked his work, to be honest, but you know, he's one of the only people that was doing the work for a long time. And one of the things that he suggested is Canadians basically have three very bright line categories: embrace religion, reject, and this is the smallest of them, reject religion, and the middle, which is sort of like a shoulder shrug and a nuns in the Angus Reid sample were overwhelmingly in the reject religion category. Now, again, this is not a representative sample. There's problems with the way Angus Reid does its research. For one, they use online panel polling, which skews in a couple of ways. It skews male and it skews young, right? Because who belongs to these online poll? Like, if you've ever done it, if you've ever gone to like Angus Reid's website or Leger or Abacus, right? You can sign up to do a bunch of polls, and the people who sign up the most is young men, right? So there's real problems with the Angus Reid data. That said, it's the only data that we kind of have on nuns in Canada. So it's, again, probably not totally representative, but it gives us a sort of baseline to judge. Okay, so from the Angus Reid data. All right, so the religiously affiliated, about 31% believe in extraterrestrials. It's 47% for our religious nuns. Believe in reincarnation, again, for religiously affiliated. It's about a little bit over a third, but still a third of the non-affiliated believe in reincarnation, which is cool and weird, and I don't understand. You're just going to hear me say I don't understand a lot. I think realistically this one makes sense. 72% of the religiously affiliated believe in miracles. 42% of the non-affiliated do, and there's at least a good percentage of these who say they don't believe in God and a universal spirit. So where the fuck are the miracles coming from, guys? I just genuinely don't understand. I genuinely don't understand. Make it make sense.
Are they confusing miracles with good luck?
I don't fucking know. I wish I understood why this is happening. All right, belief in hell, right? Interestingly, only like half of religiously affiliated people apparently believe in hell, which is interesting. 18% of those who are unaffiliated. So hell is not a very popular belief. Heaven, much more popular, right? For obvious reasons. You don't want to think that your non-religious relatives are roasting in a pit of fire for all of eternity, I guess. So everybody goes to heaven. Good people go to heaven when they die. Everybody's a good person, right? Essentially, other than Hitler and Stalin. Everyone. We'll talk about this later. It's about a third of our no religion sample. Believe that life on Earth is only or purely a physical or biological phenomenon. Again, this one doesn't make sense to me. This one kind of makes sense for the religiously affiliated, though I'm shocked that it's that low and kind of sad. Well, I guess that would make sense. Like, God would have had something to do with it if you're religiously affiliated. But that's only a third of the religiously unaffiliated think it's purely a physical or biological phenomenon. Just like, did you understand the question? Or I don't understand what you believe. I just don't know. These people. All right. Belief that we are all part of a mysterious or inexplicable force. Okay. So 12% of our religiously affiliated friends think that. 32% of the unaffiliated, so more unaffiliated people think we're all part of a mysterious and inexplicable force. I don't understand. 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 49% of the religiously affiliated say they believe in God, but in their own way. Super common, especially with Gen Z, absolutely, and millennials. Absolutely understand this number. Makes perfect sense. 30%, this doesn't surprise me either. And then believe in God as taught by the church, better than a third. And it's only 2% of the unaffiliated. So fun times with numbers that confuse Dr. Broussard. Okay. So, importance of religion and spirituality in everyday life in Canada and in our religion and spirituality is important in my everyday life in the US. So that's how the question is phrased. All right. So for the religiously unaffiliated, right, that kind of makes sense. About a little bit less than half say it's totally unimportant, and 21% say it's not very important. And then only the change kind of thinks it's, a little bit more than 33%? 33% say that it's somewhat important or very important. And those two categories are kind of even. And for our religiously affiliated, right, it's 75% that say it's somewhat or very important. No, the religiously affiliated, a good 25% say it's unimportant. So cool. Or not very important. In the U.S., similar things, right? When we talk about our religiously unaffiliated, you've got 33% religion and spirituality is very important to me. So 33% that agree or strongly agree, so about a third, kind of pretty close. And then, a third and then 2/3 who say it's not important. Or disagree or strongly disagree, right? That it's important to them. So that's not surprising for our religiously unaffiliated. And then what is it, like 76%, of the religiously affiliated, which again kind of makes sense, with 24%, right? So that strongly disagree or disagree, which again is weird for religiously affiliated people, but what can you do? It's maybe not that weird, actually, now that I think about it. Okay, so how much time wow, this class it zipped by for me. I don't know about for y'all. Probably not. All right. My wife is asking if I want to go bowling. What a strange thing to ask on a Monday morning. Okay, so what do we have here? I'm trying to read this chart, and religious or spiritual practices. Oh, this is for our nuns. Frequency of religious or spiritual practice on one's own. So how much do they do things on their own if you're a nun? Basically nothing, right? This is much more consistent. It makes much more sense. The nuns, basically, 82% of them say they don't do spiritual or religious practice on their own ever, right? And then, 18% kind of broken up between, a few times a year. So 87% is a few times a year or less. And then, you've got 12% that it's, at least once a month or at least once a week. That kind of makes sense. That makes a lot more sense for our nuns. Religious service attendance, you're talking about like 2% basically. Was that 98%? Yeah, 98%. That it's a few times a year, probably family obligation, right? You're going with your grandma at Christmas and Easter or something like that, and the rest of the time it's never, right? So 98% basically never attend religious services. So that's much more consistent numbers and makes a lot more sense. Frequency of meditating, still pretty infrequently done by our nuns, right? So you've got your 59% who are, basically never or seldom. And then, basically a quarter that say they do it at least once a day. Meditating isn't necessarily a religious or spiritual activity though, right? There's a lot of non-religious meditations that you can do. Staring into the void until the void stares back at you, as Nietzsche would put it. Frequency of reading scriptures outside of religious services, basically never, right? What's that? 79% is seldom or never. With just, I dropped my pen. And you're all like, yay, you can't scribble on things anymore. Except in this case, I'll actually bother to pick it up. You're like, I hope it's broken. No, I love my doodles. Okay, frequency of participating in prayer groups, right? 89% say never. Seldom or never. And frequency of religious service attendance, it's 72%, which is seldom or never. And then if you put seldom, never, a few times a month, right? That's not very often. That's 19%. Okay, so that's, very low. Frequency of prayer outside of religious services, almost never, although 20% still say they're doing it. So interesting numbers there. Sorry, I haven't looked up in a minute. All right. Oh, 2 minutes. 2 minutes? Let's talk about this a little bit. Okay. So I think this is really interesting. Nietzsche apparently was wrong, right? Because Nietzsche sort of proposed that, the death of God, which is sort of what we're seeing here, would probably bring about a sort of deep nihilist. And this is this is what Joel says, is this is a pretty commonly held view amongst, religious people, that those who are non-religious must essentially be nihilists, right? To believe that life has no meaning, in Camus' terms, life is absurd, right? And it's just suffering and unhappiness, and then you join r/antinatalist, and you're kind of off to the races. This is a group of people on Reddit that say it's basically like abuse to bring a child into the world, right? That being born is one of the worst things that can happen to a human being. Cheery, folks. This is what religious people, I think, kind of often think about non-religious people. But according to this Angus Reid poll, and again, it's not great data, those who reject religion are most likely to attribute things to, their own efforts, right? Chance, right? Luck, chance and luck, and then God is 8%, right? So 93% say, I make my own luck, things happen because I did things. So they're not necessarily nihilists, like thinking they're, at the mercy of swirling, incomprehensible forces. And maybe I'll pick up on this. I'll put a little star by it because this is always, I think, an interesting comment. Generally, right, they will say things like, everything happens for a reason, right? When it's like, why do things happen to you in life? Well, everything happens for a reason. It's all over their interview data. We'll talk about this on Wednesday. And I think we'll be able to finish off with the nuns on Wednesday. I think. I must keep my doodles. Okay. Yeah, we just have 5 slides left. So we will get there. Okay, see you on Wednesday.
So are people accidentally religious if we're going with the idea that religion is the belief in a superhuman